It's a mindless murder that haunts the Motor City. A miserable end to a short life. Christina Brown savagely slaughtered at the tender age of 12. A little girl who wrote a composition about being poor.
People talk about poor people, but they don't know how they feel. Sleeping in abandoned buildings, not knowing where they're going to eat, not next meal. They're stuck there.
Detroit, once the car capital of the world, tragically transformed into the murder capital of the country 30 years ago.
Bill Proctor, Channel 7 Action News, reported.
And veteran TV crime reporter Bill Proctor covered it all, including the murder of little Christina Brown.
I must admit, at that time, it was simply another assignment. It was another tragedy in Detroit. There were many in those days. There were drug dealing related deaths and violence everywhere. It was almost a daily call. You walk away from it, you are done.
From the get-go, the suspect was 23-year-old Lamarr Monson, the man who used the tiny 12-year-old to deal crack.
Number 9655982, Lamarr Monson. The charge is murder in the first degree premeditated.
By anyone's account, the young girl's death is horrific. Christina lays crumpled on the bathroom floor, covered from head to toe in her own blood. A bloody knife is nearby. Lamarr Monson says he stumbled upon the gruesome scene and then went to get help.
She was still breathing. He went knocking on doors to try to get help. He waited at the scene, spoke to police, talked about what he had seen, what he had done, his attempt to save his friend.
The case seemed to be sewn up in no time at all. Cops had what they think is the murder weapon, the knife.
The cause of her death was the result of multiple stab wounds.
And they had their suspect, Lamarr Monson. They'll get his confession that will lead to a conviction and a sentence of 30 to 50 years. For the Detroit police force back then, it's a job well done, but did they have the wrong man?
The way Lamarr was raised, nobody could tell me that Lamarr would do something like they accused him of doing. Nobody. I wouldn't believe that in a million years. I had brought him up as a young man who had never given me any problems or any trouble at any time. He was always respectable and very, very smart.
Lamarr's church-going mother, Dolores Monson, says her son was set up and has faith in his innocence.
I always set a plate at the table for him, but he wasn't here. But he was here in spirit.
What do you miss most about Lamarr?
His smile. Him telling me that he loves me every day. His hugs and his kisses. He didn't miss a day telling me that he loved me.
Lamarr Monson has been sitting behind bars for 2 decades now. All that time, he claimed, he was coerced into signing a typed confession after spending a night in police custody. None of the words, he says, are his, especially those in the confession. That there was a fight, and he stabbed his young friend in the neck and left her to bleed to death.
Even if there are other charges that could have given him, quote, 15 years in prison, that's what he should have been convicted of. That's what he should be serving his time for. But no, you should not be spending time in prison for a murder you didn't commit.
Bill Proctor was just days away from retirement after more than 3 decades of pounding the newsbeat on the mean streets of Detroit. Then, out of the blue, he gets a phone call. It's a woman named Shalina Bentley, and she tells Proctor cops have the wrong guy locked up.
I guess it was kind of a last-ditch effort because she had done everything she could.
Bentley says she had been trying to tell the police what she had known for the past 4 years, but she says they didn't want to hear it.
They just felt like that boy did it, and he didn't do it.
Bentley says she actually knows little Christina's real killer, and it wasn't Lamarr Monson.
When I close my eyes, I see the blood dripping off that man's finger.
Shalina was living in this dilapidated apartment building, now an empty lot, on that dark day when Christina met her murderer.
What's it feel like being back here, Shalina?
Just an eerie feeling. I'm not comfortable here. I see bad memories of the little girl that got killed here.
Shalina has turned her life around, but back then, she was a hardcore junkie looking for her next fix. She claims her drug buddy, Robert Lewis, went downstairs looking to score some crack on credit. That's when Shalina says Lewis ran into Christina, who was all alone.
When he came back up, he said, let's go. He think he killed her.
When he said he killed her and you saw the blood, can you still remember that moment?
I can still remember the blood dropping off his fingernails.
Crime Watch Daily reached out to Lewis by phone. He has denied any involvement in Christina's murder. Indeed, cops have looked at Shalina with a leery eye. After all, she took 16 years to come forward. Shalina says she lived with her terrible secret because Lewis had threatened to kill her family if she ratted him out. She took him at his word.
It was just another story.
Proctor said his reporting back then was based on the official police version of the murder. Now he believes the police got it wrong.
And to find out just as I was retiring that I got it wrong, that I reported something that was not correct, was upsetting.
Bill Proctor locked onto this case like the jaws of a pit bull. And of course, as a journalist, as a news reporter, it is your duty to dig deep to get to the truth. But even in retirement, Proctor is still relentless and tireless in his hunt for justice.
Because the Detroit Police Department forensically simply could have followed a blood trail from the murder scene up to Shalina Bentley's apartment. Had they followed that trail, they would have had a whole new set of questions to ask.
Lamarr Monson has spent the last 7,342 days waking up behind bars, asking the same question: why am I here? For 20 years, he's been in prison for a murder he says he didn't commit.
They escorted us to the police car and went downtown for questioning as witnesses.
But Lamarr was convicted of killing Christina Brown, who was just 12 years old. Christina, a lost child, lived in Lamarr's apartment building. He'll never forget the day he found her body.
Once I made it to the bathroom, it was like a horror movie. I just was in complete shock. I seen her laying on the floor. She was still alive. She was waving her arms at me, and I immediately turned to have somebody go and call the EMS.
Lamarr Monson said he thought he was being hauled into the police precinct as a witness. Then he realized he was a suspect.
They began to tell the story instead of me telling them what I knew. I agreed to sign at that point, reluctantly.
Are you telling me that you did not read the document that you signed that sent you to prison for 30 to 50 years?
Yes, sir. The situation was, at this time, I was not thinking right at all.
How would you categorize how you were handled by the Detroit police?
Well, I would say that they viewed me just simply as expendable for the purposes of a conviction.
Investigative reporter Bill Proctor covered the story 20 years ago while on the crime beat in Detroit. Back then, this was just another story. Now Proctor is on a mission to find justice.
Yeah, I may be retired, but I can't stop.
Proctor has since retired his press card, but not his reporter's instincts. He now believes in Lamarr Monson's innocence. He changed his mind because of this woman, Shalina Bentley. She claims her drug buddy back then, Robert Lewis, is the one who killed Christina.
They just felt like that boy did it, and he didn't do it.
Shalina says fear kept her silent. She claims Robert Lewis threatened to kill her family if she snitched. As you said, she wasn't handcuffed, but she was handcuffed by fear.
Yes, and she knew they wouldn't have a problem hurting anybody.
I couldn't even go to work. I lost my job.
Not only that, the man who Shalina says killed the little girl was interviewed by police and released after questioning. Crime Watch Daily spoke to him by phone. He has denied any involvement of any kind in Christina's murder. Then Shalina found out Lamarr took the rap, and she had to come forward.
I just want to tell him and family I'm sorry, that I waited so long, because there's a man that's in prison for something he did not commit. And it's the right thing to do.
Now Proctor is on a mission to free Monson. He's teamed up with David Moran, the director of the Michigan Innocence Clinic. When I say the name Lamarr Monson to you, the first word or words that come to mind are what?
Wrongfully convicted and should be freed as soon as possible. And I'm disappointed that he's still in, given the evidence that we found in the last few years in the case.
But what about Monson's confession to the killing?
His confession was demonstrably false. The confession that was typed by the detective, not written by Lamarr, but typed by the detective and then signed by him, and Lamarr says he was tricked into signing it.
And then another bombshell. The autopsy reveals the true cause of death.
So the confession is that he stabs her to death. But 12 days later, the autopsy came back from the Wayne County medical examiners, and it showed that actually the victim was beaten to death. And so that is a very strong indicator of a false confession.
In this crime scene photo, you can see the ceramic toilet tank lid is missing. Moran says that is the likely murder weapon. Christina had been stabbed as well, but that was not the cause of death. The report shows she had been bludgeoned to death.
There's not a one word in Lamarr's confession about beating this victim to death. If he's the guy who murdered Christina Brown, why would he be the one running around the apartment buildings frantically saying, somebody please call the police? Why would he stick around? He's dealing drugs at the time. Drug dealers don't normally want to stick around and talk to the police. He stuck around and waited for the police to come.
Moran also discovered that cops had lifted 2 fingerprints from the toilet tank lid. One matched Christina Brown, the other was a mystery. It was at the same time that a determined Shalina Bentley reached out to Bill Proctor to tell her story.
So then our focus shifted from just finding out was there a fingerprint on the toilet tank lid to did the fingerprint match the man that she named.
This report shows Detroit police tested the fingerprint in 2015 to see if it belonged to Robert Lewis. The results?
It matched.
And just to add more fuel to the fire of outrage, the homicide inspector who oversaw Lamarr's so-called mea culpa, Joan Gagosian, was later implicated in several potential coerced confessions. Who failed Lamarr Monson?
The Detroit police failed Lamarr Monson. The Detroit police failed, more importantly, Christina Brown, because the Detroit Police Department forensically simply could have followed a blood trail from the murder scene up to Shalina Bentley's apartment. He should be paying for it and not Lamarr Monson.
Bill Proctor set out to track down Lewis. Instead, he found his brother Raymond, who was reportedly living with Robert in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. But there was no sign of Robert.
I mean, how did you go about finding me where I was at?
What's been the toughest part? What's been the most frustrating?
To know that there's a prosecutor standing at the door with her arms folded saying, oh no, they already had their bite at the apple. I could wring their necks, because the real bottom line is that bite at the apple led to the wrong conclusion. That's what's frustrating. To know that there is credible evidence that should lead to a new trial, that should lead to a review of past facts, that should be considered as new evidence. And then they don't do it? What the hell?
How does it feel to stand up and do what's right?
I wouldn't know it's right until that man is out that prison. I mean, I did all I can do. For me, that's right, but now it's up to the prosecutor for them to do the right thing.
Lamarr's mom, Dolores, has forgiven Shalina for waiting so long to come forward.
My heart went out to her because she knew something that would help and save my son. I've loved her ever since.
What do you want Lamarr Monson to hear from you personally?
I don't want him to hear anything. I just want him to smell freedom.
Despite new evidence, Lamarr Monson remains behind bars, and Robert Lewis is still a free man.
You have hope?
Give me a little while. I'm not sure where I am with hope right now for the change, but I know I'm going to keep pushing for it for as long as I'm alive.
I'm gonna live to see my son come home. Yes, I am.